The session is recorded, so if you don't want to be on camera or want to be heard, please mute your mic and close your cameras, and you can send any questions through, of course, in the chat box. And today, of course, we're covering the interesting topic of crew changes, crew welfare, sustainability going forward, and different scenarios and aspects from the maritime stakeholders. And joining us today, we have Guy Platten, the Secretary General of the International Chamber of Shipping, Catherine Spencer, the CEO of Seafarers UK, Debbie Cavaldoro, Head of Strategy and Policy at Nautilus International, Lena During, Director Cruise Operations Norwegian Seafarers Union, and Tim Springett, Policy Director at the UK Chamber of Shipping. Welcome to everybody, and thank you for accepting to be on the show today.
Thank you, Nina.
I'll just quickly ask everybody or remind them that they can send their questions to the chat box. You can also, of course, raise your hand. We will be taking questions at the end of today's session. And without further ado, COVID-19 has been a part of our life for more than a year now and seems to be going into the end of the second year. Undoubtedly, collateral victims of this pandemic were our seafarers. And I would like to know from each of you, as you do have quite different experiences from within the industry, what were the greatest challenges that you faced in this respect? And what do you feel is the cost of the crisis for our industry and beyond our industry, of course, because the shipping industry does affect so many other parts and sectors. Who would like, maybe Catherine, you would like to go first, as I'm seeing you first on my screen.
Okay, fine. Thanks, Gina. Well, I guess I've probably got a different perspective to others on the call because, of course, I'm looking at it from the charity sector and welfare charities, which, of course, play a really vital role across the maritime sector. So I think for the charity, it's for Seafarers UK, we are a very proud grant funder. So actually, the impact to us has actually been reasonably small. We were able to pivot and provide us and operate remotely. We're of course concerned about our delivery charities and how they were going to operate. But I think really the biggest impact for us has been fundraising because of course, like across the charity sector, we've lost ability to raise money through things like the Virgin London Marathon. So when we look at our accounts for last year, our fundraising activities are probably at 65% of where we would normally expect them to be. So I think that's the biggest challenge for my particular organisation. I think if I had to pick out one thing that we were specifically worried about for the sector was really that we're already concerned about mental health of seafarers, and obviously going into COVID-19, I think we've seen that problem exacerbated even further.
Thank you, Catherine. Yes, of course, unfortunately, that is one of the main issues that we are seeing. Guy, would you like to share your thoughts with us?
I think that the biggest challenge is I think, just getting the awareness of the issue out there. And I think collectively we work together. Catherine has been part of that as well. I think that was the biggest challenge facing our industry is seafarers were forgotten. Sea shipping was forgotten. And when the country shut down their borders, they completely didn't want to shut down the ships coming into their ports to offload the vital fuel, the supplies, the medical equipment, all these other things. And seafarers have kept delivering all the way through. So to me, the biggest challenge has been to change that concept of seafarers. And I think to some, we've had some good successes there. And it was interesting. I was speaking to my chairman yesterday, and we managed to get a front page in the Financial Times about the seafarer crisis. And that was actually read by a key minister in Singapore. And that, as a direct result of that FT headline, changed Singapore's attitude towards seafarers. So we do know by raising this in the mainstream media and getting there, that has been a success. But that has been a huge challenge going forward. I think what I'm worried about the mental health of seafarers, of course, but I'm also worried, and we were seeing evidence of this at seafarers. Why on earth would you want to go? I wouldn't want to go to sea at the moment. I'm a seafarer, not knowing when you're going to come home again. So I think we have got a challenge as an industry to persuade people that seafaring is still a viable profession. And the other big challenge I think we've got is, and I'm really worried about it, is vaccinations. Is that whilst we in the UK are lucky, we're all going to get called forward, some of us sooner rather than later, but we're all going to get called forward for a vaccination, and that's great. But if you look at the Philippines, for example, they've only got enough vaccine allocation for 1 in 100 people. So where seafarers going to be in that queue? And also, we know, because it's in the papers now, vaccine passports are going to be introduced for the countries across the world. You will not be able to travel unless you've got a vaccine passport. And if you come from a seafarer from a developing nation, you're going to be stuck. So to me, the biggest challenge is making sure seafarers get access to vaccines, and that's going to be a collective effort of all of us to do so. And I sort of seem to spend quite a few of my days now doing just that. Sorry, that's a long-winded answer, Gina, sorry.
Indeed, no, so that's such a crucial topic with the vaccines, and of course the news on Financial Times is amazing. Definitely raising the profile of the industry is the way going forward. Debbie, would you like to go next?
Yeah, thanks, Gina. I think the main problems kind of changed as the coronavirus progressed. I think at the very start of this time last year, one of the problems was the outbreaks on cruise ships, and government's sort of go-to plan is always blame the seafarers when anything goes wrong. So at the start, with the lack of information that governments had, they were very quick to kind of blame those on board the cruise ships for not containing it well enough. I think didn't really understand, sort of when you looked at how fast it spread since, when you look back at how much seafarers on board cruise ships were blamed at the start, it kind of seems laughable now to think that they could ever have been expected to contain that in the way they were expected to. And then following on from that, as awareness kind of rose kind of March, April last year, everything changed so quickly, so often, that our main responsibility at Nautilus and the challenge that we found was getting that information out to seafarers, because they're not around it in the same way as everyone else, or they can't tune into the nightly government messages on TV and whatever country they're from. So we were having to kind of, and even when you could get the information, for most of us that are land-based, it was really difficult to understand exactly what you were supposed to be doing or not doing at any one time. So kind of trying to convey those messages to seafarers who were travelling in and out of borders the whole time, so more affected by the lockdowns than a lot of us were, it was really difficult. And I think, like Guy's touched on, the lack of awareness, certainly with governments, of what maritime does and how vital it is. We talk a lot about 90% of everything coming by sea, but I think people never really understood what that actually meant until they didn't have PPE, until they didn't have medical supplies, until they didn't have, there were risks of sort of shortages on supermarkets. And even with the supermarket shortages, they blamed it on trucks not being able to get in. They weren't thinking about what happens before that and how it actually gets into the UK, certainly, or into any countries around the world. So I think that for the thing for us has been getting the information out to seafarers. And we've got a frequently asked questions on COVID on our website, and it's been the most visited page we've ever had on our website, and far reaching beyond our membership, which kind of shows that everyone in the maritime industry was kind of looking to us to give some answers when they didn't have any. And then obviously that changed into what's probably most people's kind of noticeable challenge, was obviously the crew change crisis and what happened with that. And part of that was about the rapidly changing information. And even when we could get seafarers designated as key workers, border patrol didn't always understand what that meant. You've got to get through so many countries to get home that there's a lot of people you've got to explain that to. We worked with the UK Chamber a lot to kind of allow to write their own letters to give to border patrol so that people could get through. So that kind of rapidly changing information, how you get the information to seafarers. And then I think lastly, as Guy alluded to, a survey we did at the back end of last year showed that nearly half of seafarers have changed the way they feel about going to sea because of the way this crisis has been handled. And when you add to that the terrible way that a lot of cadets have been handled, particularly, why would they want to continue going to sea long term? We talk a lot about respecting seafarers, and we have a lot of jargon, and we spend a lot of time. I think one of maritime's failings is we spend a lot of time talking to each other, and we know 95% of everything, and we know that we must respect seafarers, but that message just doesn't get out there still. and seafarers are getting to the end of their patience with it and just thinking, if this is the way that you're going to treat me, even when you designate me as a key worker, then why should I continue going to sea? So I think that's going to be the long-term issue we're all going to have to look at, is how we make going to sea something that seafarers still want to do.
Yes, exactly. And I'm very happy that you mentioned it, actually, because I think we're all discussing the consequences and what's happening now, but maybe we're forgetting about what will be the residue of this going forward. Tim, would you like to share your thoughts on this also?
Thank you very much, Gina, and welcome to all the audience, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. I agree with all the points that have been made so far. They are all very relevant. I think from my point of view, as the UK Chamber of Shipping, our members are a wide diversity of shipping companies that have been trying to battle their way through the COVID crisis. In many sectors, seafarers have lost their jobs, particularly in the passenger trades, but also in activities supporting the oil sector, because there's been a further fall in the price of oil resulting from the pandemic, and that's resulted in a further wave of redundancies in the sector, which comes hot on the heels of the 2015 oil price collapse. So just as the industry was appearing to be in recovery mode, it's been hit by another hammer blow. Companies have themselves needed to implement very expensive and very carefully planned measures to minimize the risk of the infection coming on board their ships. You imagine what an outbreak on board that would strike down an entire ship's crew, what the effects of that would be. So this has meant that companies have voluntarily put their crews into isolation for 14 days before they're even allowed to join a ship or fly out to an offshore installation. In many cases, they've had to implement protocols. They've placed restrictions, in some cases outright banned surely for seafarers, which is hugely regrettable, but unfortunately it's been necessary. And the toll that it has taken, Catherine mentioned the mental health of seafarers, the physical health of seafarers as well. And we've heard of cases of seafarers being refused access to medical treatment in ports, and their ships having to divert a considerable number of nautical miles in order to get people off ships. Sometimes those have been because of physical conditions. Sometimes it's because of mental conditions. Some seafarers have probably been quite close to being suicide statistics, but thankfully have been, in the majority of cases, sadly not every case, but in the majority, it has been possible to take them off ships. The disruption of training for trainee seafarers is something that we're still trying to grapple with. Whilst training times can be extended, the financial implications for that, for those who are providing funding as well as for the companies, are huge. And I think in terms of the cost of the crisis, we've heard about whether seafaring remains an attractive industry to work in. It's clearly proven its value as an essential industry in keeping supply chains operating. But I think another thing has been the loss of trust between different parts of the industry, with different players looking after their own interests and abandoning, in many cases, the kind of collaborative approach that leads to more efficient operations and benefits for everybody. What I would say, just in closing on this point, is to highlight the work that ICS has done. We are members of the ICS, and they've done a remarkable job for about a year now in holding together a coalition of interests to promote the right sort of policies for shipping and in particular for seafarers, with regular meetings involving ITF and other industry players. It's required considerable diplomacy at some times, and I think it's Guy hasn't mentioned it himself, but I see it as an outstanding achievement on the part of the International Chamber of Shipping.
Indeed, and I think we have seen such great collaboration and initiatives from the industry that it's quite important to always mention them. So thanks for noting that, Tim. And Lena, if you would like to share your thoughts on this, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. And first of all, thank you for inviting me to join you today. I'm very grateful for that. I'll talk about it, I guess. In my day-to-day work, I work mostly with the cruise and the cruise industry and passenger vessels. So I guess I'll talk about it more from that angle. And I'm not gonna of course, the issues were a lot of the same that have already been mentioned by Debbie and by Guy as well, amongst others. Especially in the beginning, I think one thing I do want to say, just like Debbie said in the beginning, it was so much emphasis on the cruise lines, and they were kind of being held culpable for the spread of the virus, whereas the reason was actually in many ways, and not only for the spread of the virus, but also for seafarers not being able to go home, whereas the real reason was that the borders were closed and the travel restrictions were in full force. And I think that focus in the initial stage actually made the process of getting people home even slower than it would otherwise have been if the focus had been in the right place from the beginning. So I do want to point that out. I do also want to point something else, because it's presented itself in phases, this whole process. And I say the kind of current and longest phase that we're in right now, where everyone is home and awaiting the return of the cruise industry, it's in a way also the phase that has gotten the least amount of attention and the consequences of this, because we're facing now mass unemployment among cruise ship seafarers, and all of the financial and social problems that this causes. So this is very, very serious. We have seafarers that literally don't have enough money to put food on their family's table, or not being able to pay for hospital bills for their loved ones. And many of these seafarers are, of course, from countries with no social safety net, which has made this long period of unemployment infinitely worse. So, and another very sad outcome that has not yet, at least, gotten so much focus, I think, is the fact that a large percentage of the very few women seafarers, they actually do work in the cruise industry. And these are now, of course, seafarers in the cruise industry, they are now the ones who, to a large degree, have lost their jobs. So that is something that's very important. So on top of everything else, we may see an outcome of this being that the total percentage or number of women seafarers will actually go down, which is very, very sad. And that's something we should all work on and focus on to make sure to get these women to want to come back to sea once the industry restarts. It's something that we should focus on together, because we've had so much progress in that area recently. So yeah, thank you. I guess those are my points on this issue.
Thank you, Lena, and especially for that last point. I mean, it's very important to be highlighting these different aspects. And even the International Women's Day theme this year is the effect on women, okay, in leadership, but generally through the COVID-19. So what you're saying about the cruise industry is definitely of ultimate significance. So thanks for that. You've all mentioned your different experiences so far and the challenges, and maybe briefly I would also like you, and I know already credit has been given to associations for the great work you've all been doing, but a key initiative from your side that you have seen within the scope of this crisis, of this crew change crisis. Catherine, would you like to go first again? You're right.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that's okay. So, I mean, again, from Seafarers UK's perspective, I think we really, recognise the need to make sure that we were responding to the welfare charity sectors who rely on us. And we already have a grant programme that awards about million plus every year. In fact, I think it's probably about 2.5 last year. And one of the key things I would say we did in response to the crisis was quite early on get our trustees to release an additional £2 million worth of funding to support the sector. And then our impact or grants director, Deborah Lade, and her team have worked incredibly hard across the sector to try and understand what that need is. And despite having the name Seafarers UK, which is a bit misleading, we actually work globally. So we've been able to support organisations within the UK and organisations that support seafarers across the world. And it's been really exciting to be involved in those. I mean, I think one of the ones which is quite well known is the work that Mission to Seafarers have done with their online chaplaincy, which obviously addresses some of the mental health concerns that we have. But then we've done a wide range of work, including emergency support for seafarers in India, for families in India who just didn't have any money to buy essentials. So I think that's probably been, and of course, collaborative work that we've done has been the most impressive part of the response that we've had this year. But I think the response across the sector has been really superb. I think the work that the International Chamber of Shipping has done has been so incredibly impressive. Both Guy and Natalie have done a brilliant job. And then actually with the welfare charity sector, the Merchant Navy Welfare Board has also run a collaborative, a kind of more tactical approach with the charities to make sure there's collaborative working there. So I think it's been good to be part of something where people have really pulled together to do the best they can.
Indeed, that's a very positive note, and always nice to hear. The ICS is coming up so frequently. It's great. It's great, and the work you did. Guy, are you there? Would you like to?
Actually, I think rather than say initiatives, because I think it's been a collective initiative from all of us. I've been deeply impressed with what the welfare charities have actually done during this crisis. Because some of them are, especially the port visitors and things like that, where some of them were quite vulnerable people in their own right, had to shield, suddenly having to pivot to a new way of working was incredibly important. And I think it still hasn't really improved, but seafarers weren't even allowed ashore, denied medical access. So I think the work of the welfare charities has been absolutely amazing. But I think to me, the best initiative, which is a collective one, I think we've all come together like never before. And we all talk to each other now, and we're finding problems get solved much more quickly that way. So, it's to see the ITF, the ICS, the welfare charities, the IMO, the ILO, all speaking probably too often to each other. Sometimes it feels like never-ending calls. But I think that to me has been the greatest initiative of this last year. And what we need to do, they hear politicians talking about build back better. Well, we need to build back better as well in terms of the welfare and the support for our seafarers. And I think everyone realises that you can't run ships without them. And it sounds like a glib statement, but it's so true. And I think hopefully we can take lessons over the last year forward in a positive light.
So very true, and it's just on the one side frustrating and just so fascinating to see that a year and a half down the line we're still discussing why seafarers are key workers. But definitely collaboration is key.
I think there's 176 countries which send a delegation to the IMO or part of IMO. Out of those 176, I think it's only 54 are formally declared seafarers as key workers. So, and that's despite resolutions at the IMO, resolutions at the ILO, resolutions at the United Nations, the Pope coming out, the United Nations Secretary General coming out, and everything. So we've still got this problem of getting governments to recognise how vital the role seafarers play. And I think someone said the other day, the only way they're really going to realise is if we stopped all the ships outside ports for a week.
Exactly. Exactly. Debbie, would you like to go next?
Yeah, thanks. And I certainly think that more than one seafarer has suggested to me that it's time for them to just down tools and stop and see what happens. I think I'm probably echoing what everyone else has said. I think it's demonstrated that tripartite working, and I would include charities in that, really works in maritime, and is a lesson to kind of other most industries these days are becoming more and more global. And I think maritime is an example that unions, companies, charities and governments should all be working together. And there's, you know, the classic phrase, there's more we agree on than disagree on. And, you know, we can really make a difference when we're all pulling together. I think the campaign that happened at Christmas was kind of a prime example of actually that going beyond the just talking into action, and each part spoke to their audience, but in a way that joined together and really highlighted the crew change issue. And I think my only thing now would be that we need to take that tripartite and move it into also engaging the public, and, you know, move outside of just talking to each other and being able to acknowledge it with each other. How do we make the wider, you know, government departments that aren't around that table, and the public really understand what seafarers happen, and, you know, stop seafarers being, you know, out of sight, out of mind, make the industry a bit more open and honest and front up to the good and the bad, because we can, you know, together we can fix those, you know, any bad things that we're hiding, we can fix them if we work together. And, you know, if a lot of World Health Organization comments seem to suggest that this isn't the last time we're going to see this sort of crisis, with global travel happening so much more now. And we need to make sure that next time it does happen, we haven't got to start by knocking on the door and telling people who seafarers are. We need to be inside the room at the start so that we can immediately say, this is what needs to happen for seafarers. So we're not trying to break down those barriers that we're always trying to break down of getting seafarers recognised. They're already well involved and acknowledged as the global, you know, people that make global trade happen. So, you know, start with them rather than, you know, start with helping them rather than start with blaming them or then working backwards. Thanks, Gina.
Exactly. Guy, there's something you want to add?
Yes, sorry, it was just something that's triggered something that Debbie was just saying. And I thought, otherwise I could just go out of my head if I don't put my hand up and just took back right to note, is that it's not just about governments now, it's the whole supply chain has to realise the importance of this. And one of the things that we've done, ITF have been very strong on this, actually really, really good. It's reaching out to the entire supply chain to make them realise their social and responsibilities. And actually, the call I have following this at 2:30 is with the UN Global Compact, and they've developed a human rights checklist for supply companies, and it's all about seafarers. It's about when you are engaging with your contractors with all of this, have you done your due diligence? I think it's called a due diligence checklist, which the person who's doing it can't say the word diligence, and it's now got to my head as well. So we keep saying it wrongly, but that's going to be quite powerful. In other words, companies will sign up to that. They will use this checklist to make sure that the crews they are engaged with in the supply chain are properly rested, are part of countries subscribing to the Maritime Labour Convention, all these different things. So it's not just governments, it's everyone really. Sorry, that was just something you said, Debbie. It's part of that whole.
No, thanks for that. That was such an interesting addition. And I know people are generally a bit reluctant in the industry when they hear checklists, but as a maritime lawyer, I'm so for them because they're always a good starting point to make things happen. Tim, would you like to share your thoughts on the key initiative?
Thank you. Well, I think in terms of the organisation that I represent, which is a national trade association, our first task at the beginning of the pandemic was to convince our government that seafarers needed to be classed as key workers. And what sometimes gets lost is what that designation means. In terms of the UK, we were successful and it was important, but what it meant was that seafarers would not have their travel within the UK to go and join their ships restricted when everybody else was having theirs quite tightly controlled and could easily be stopped, by police, and their children could continue to attend school. So from that point of view, it was very useful. I accept that the designation is going to mean different things to different people, and certainly in different countries. So, but it was an important first step for us. Later on, we persuaded the government to exempt seafarers from quarantine restrictions when arriving in the UK, and also from the need to show a negative PCR test prior to arrival. This was all in order to ensure the facilitation of seafarer movement and recognise that they were a special class of traveller. Now, however, we need to repeat our lobbying following the banning of flights from countries on the red list, the requirement for returning UK nationals who've been in these countries to quarantine in hotels at their own expense, because for those working offshore in the seas off of South America and South Africa, Southern Africa, this has been a particularly savage blow. As I said in my first intervention, many of those are in accordance with company policies, self-isolating for 14 days before travelling to their workplaces. Now they're having the time that they did expect to be able to spend at home with their families taken from them. And it unfortunately fails to take into account the very strict company protocols that are in place to ensure that they are the infection risk is minimised to the greatest extent possible, and also the fact that they're not mixing with local populations. But travelling straight from from the rig, perhaps by helicopter to the airport for their flights, none of that has yet been taken into account, and so we need to step up our efforts. Just wearing another hat as I do, because I chair the Social Affairs Committee of the European Community Shipowners Association. And so that body has done a lot of work with the European Commission, which has issued recommendations and protocols for keeping, first of all, the EU's internal borders open, and facilitating crew changes and crew movements into and out of the EU. What's happened here? I hope you can still hear me, but yeah. Oh, good. Yeah. Sorry, my screen went blank there for a moment. The Commission doesn't have the power to mandate member states to do any of this, but national associations, ship owners associations, have used these recommendations to lobby their own governments. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Tim. Thanks for sharing the information and from your other hat side. Lena?
Thank you. Yeah, we've had to do a lot of different things and initiatives throughout this crisis, or I call it that. And just like the others say, we've also worked very closely with employers to find solutions for different things, and that's overall been a very positive experience. So we've had to find solutions for repatriation, navigating international legislation, and how to do this within collective bargaining agreements. And it's a very chaotic and unprecedented landscape. We've also had to, of course, assist a lot of individual seafarers in very extreme situations, some of them. I can bring some examples up later, but and that has been very, very difficult to manage, I have to say. But we've, for the most part, been able to find solutions, but it takes too much time. Then we've also worked a lot on trying to continue to, even though we do have a lot of seafarers who are at home unemployed right now, we want to ensure and make sure that we continue to stay in touch with them and continue to have contact. So we try to do that through a more, of course, digital platform like everyone else these days. Where we try to provide information and also education and to stay in touch with people. And that has been pretty successful, I think. We've also, of course, worked through the ITF system and what we can do there to improve situation for seafarers, and also, of course, locally through national channels here in Norway. I also want to say for us to have the contact with the ITF inspectors around has helped us a lot. They have a lot of the knowledge on the ground, which in many situations has been kind of the key to be able to solve, especially individual situations for seafarers. So that has been very, very helpful for us. I also want to say that kind of our main goal, of course, throughout this period has been to ensure that hard-fought benefits for seafarers are not taken away due to financial stress, and then also to, at the same time, ensure that the jobs are there for the seafarers long term. So that's kind of our guiding light, I guess, throughout the crisis. But yeah, those are the main topics, I guess.
Thank you. Excellent. It's so nice to hear so many initiatives happening in this respect. Going on to the next question, what I would ask from your experiences, do you feel that other, of course, in the physical closing of the borders, that was something that nobody could have foreseen or expected? Has this crew change crisis brought to the surface mainly pre-existing issues or new issues? And have you detected any gaps in policies when it comes to this respect, and how can they be breached? Tim, would you like to go first?
Yes, for sure. Well, the ability to rotate crew seamlessly is essential for ship operators and seafarers alike. One thing that the pandemic has proven is that crew reliefs and rotations rely on a complete chain being in place, which is available flights, safe and secure means of travel between airports and seaports, government at national and local level, keeping ports open for crew changes, putting in place adequate measures to protect the safety, health and welfare of seafarers arriving by air and on their ships, efficient issuance of documents such as visas and any other sort of identity documents that seafarers might need to facilitate their travel. It only takes one link in this chain to fail to function for the system to break down. And what has been particularly frustrating, despite the best efforts of, I would say ICS and all the others that have been part of the coalition that has cooperated so well over the past year, is that it seems we've collectively solved one part of it that has broken down. Almost immediately another has broken down, and the poor old crew members are the ones who have been suffering. And while the focus is quite justifiably on those who have been stuck on ships well beyond the lengths of their contracts, let's not also forget the ones who have been stuck at home kicking their heels waiting to replace them, unable to work and quite possibly without an income. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Tim. Debbie?
Yeah, I think on the issues it's brought and whether they're pre-existing, I think there's two main things I'd just like to cover. The first is kind of the mental health impact, which has always been there, but I think has very much been much more in front and centre in maritime in the last couple of years, and just in time, I think, to be able to deal with this crisis. I think if you look back kind of 5 or 10 years ago when mental health wasn't really talked about at all, it would have made this situation much harder to deal with. But it's really difficult, especially as a trade union, when there's only a limited amount of things you can do to actually make these things happen. I've spoken, and it comes from all angles. I've spoken to a member who was expecting to come home that week, who gets told suddenly that his crew change is cancelled indefinitely. And while seafarers acknowledge that they go away from home for long periods of time, they know, I think I've heard a lot of people say, knowing the date that you're coming home, you start to prepare yourself, and being told that that date has cancelled and you don't know when the next one is makes it immeasurably harder than going away in the first place. And the impact on those left at home, I had spoke to the wife of a member who was concerned that shore leave had been cancelled, so she didn't know if her husband was going to get medicine on board or food on board. Those sort of real issues and she's helpless to do anything about. And then and it goes all the way up. I spoke to a master a couple of weeks ago who said that he'd spent his entire day listening to various crew members crying because they'd been told they couldn't go home and they didn't know when they were going to go home, and he felt completely helpless to resolve their issues, but also completely lost on how he was supposed to motivate them to carry on working. And that tells a really real story of what's happening. But then you try and talk to the media about it and get coverage to get these issues known, and the media won't cover it unless they can speak to the seafarers themselves, and the seafarers themselves don't want to speak because they don't want to jeopardise their contracts, or that they, a lot of them have clauses in their contracts which mean they can't speak to the press. So, and the press doesn't want to hear from unions or company bosses, they want to hear from the people on board, so we're not able to get coverage for those sorts of issues. And the other issue that I think it's thrown up that as a trade union we deal with quite a lot is the issue of jurisdiction. This comes up a lot when dealing with kind of day-to-day grievances and disciplinaries that trade unions deal with, which for a shore-based trade union, just a matter of speaking to management and going through a process and making sure that process is done properly. But when you're talking about seafarers, you're talking about a ship that's flagged in one country, a company that's based in another country, a charterer that's based in another country, a crewing agency based in another country, and a seafarer based in another country. So just getting the jurisdiction covered is really difficult, and that's been highlighted a lot during the crew change crisis. For example, I was speaking to a member who was due to come home, and he knew that he could get through the UK because the UK were designated seafarers. He knew that his company had made all the arrangements. They booked his flight, they got him to the airport. But when he got to the airport said, no, our rules say that you can't go. And he got put into a migrant workers area for 2 weeks quarantine. And the people that you've got to talk to are are just so many, and it's the individual people that you can that deal with these issues that you can't get to explain what's going on. So I think jurisdiction is something that we've always talked about in trade unions, but I think this has highlighted the actual bigger impact on that. But as to the gaps in the policy, maritime is heavily regulated, and I think it shows that it's the lack of enforcement of those policies rather than anything else. I think jurisdiction shows that there should be an easy way to solve it, and there's not. But actually speaking to all the people involved is really difficult. If you read the MLC, if you read SOLAS, if you read MARPOL, it's all there to protect seafarers, to protect the maritime industry, to make sure it works properly. But you saw how quickly governments were able to put aside parts of MLC which talked about contract lengths. And then once that had been done and that excuse had been given, it then went on from there. So it's not just about the policy, it's about how it's done. And certainly when we looked at what's happened with charterers then are able to put clauses in to say no crew changes, which is completely against MLC. So it's more about how do we make sure in future that policy is adhered to, and that we don't use these excuses to make seafarers suffer when other companies are still managing to make profit or still managing to do what they want to do, and the governments are able to kind of throw these policies out whenever it suits them. So I think that's my main message is how are we going to ensure these policies are adhered to in the future.
Exactly. Thank you. Lena?
Yeah, thank you. Of course, I agree with a lot of the things there that Debbie said, for sure. And I'd say, yeah, the most severe issues are new because it's a pandemic, and with this open global economy and trading patterns and everything that we have, that being kind of faced with the pandemic, where borders are shut down, those two just don't go together at all. And nobody knows how to, evidently, we don't know how to deal with that. So, so that is a new situation. And how do you deal with that, for instance, again, in the cruise industry, where we now have massive unemployment, but it's not because of lack of demand from passengers at all. Actually, the demand is great, but it's because they can't sail, and they can't, because we don't know how to do that in a safe way yet. So I guess what we need there is, first of all, we need to learn how to do that in a safe way so that the industry can restart again as soon as possible in a safe way, of course. And then, as has been said here before already, very, very importantly is, and I'm going to say it again because it's so important, is to designate all seafarers as key workers. And then I mean all seafarers, also those who work in all sorts of hotel and catering roles on passenger vessels, so that they can get back to work and we can save jobs. And so, because now we are in a situation where cruise passengers in many countries are in a place where they are either already vaccinated or they will be very soon. But so they're ready to travel, they want to go, but none of the crew members are, because the vaccines are so unequally distributed in this world. So that is something that we need to get together and solve for sure. I also want to mention, just like Debbie said, an existing issue that has been really brought forward now is the issue of mental health for seafarers. It's been mentioned already before, but I think, you know, seafarers have had an incentive to try to hide mental health issues because they think if I talk about struggles that I have or show struggles that I have with mental health, I may not be rehired for a new contract because of the way seafarers, or many seafarers at least, are hired in this world. And that is, you know, that is very difficult to handle when they have an incentive to hide it. So I'm very happy that it's come more to the forefront, and it seems to be more acceptable to talk about mental health, but we need to continue that path and make it even more so that you don't feel that, you know, automatically, if you do have a mental health situation, that will automatically cause the loss of your job. I think it's going to be very, very important. We've had a lot as a union. We've had, you know, we've assisted a lot of seafarers, not a lot, thankfully, but, you know, a handful of seafarers' families where they have found themselves for whatever reason. I can't say why, of course, I can't talk on their behalf, but they've seen no way out. And to have to help, you know, and assist the families of these seafarers in the aftermath of that is just heartbreaking, of course, for everyone involved. And it's just, we do not want that to happen again. So we've received, you know, desperate phone calls, emails, messages through social media from seafarers who are at their wits' end. They don't know what to do, either because of restrictions of various countries, maybe even their home country, who don't even accept them to return home to their own country. So they don't know when they'll be going home, or it could be also if they're at home and they don't know where their next meal is coming from. And the level of desperation that some people reach, and understandably in a situation like that, is very stressful. So that's something that we need to talk about, and of course, most importantly, do something about. That's one example of, we had a situation where a seafarer, his wife was at home. She was dying from cancer, and his own country, we were able, together with his employer, we were able to, you know, secure flights for him and everything in a very difficult situation. But his own country said, like, no, you can't, we do not allow you entry into your own country. And he was not able to get home in time for that reason. And it's just like due to just, I would have to say, lack of compassion. I can't call it anything else. So those are issues that we have to address, of course. Going forward, we can't ever see that happening again. In terms of gaps in policy, again, just like Debbie said, the maritime industry is already very heavily regulated, but we need enforcement, and especially, of course, enforcement of the MLC. There needs to be consequence for countries who have ratified the MLC, but who are not holding up their obligations under the convention. And of course, in particular, their responsibility to ensure safe repatriation for seafarers. There are some good examples out there. I have to say the UK has done a lot of good things there, but there are also a lot of very, very bad examples. So we have to hold them accountable. And I think also some education in many countries there, because okay, you have one part of the government maybe responsible for the ratification and the implementation of the MLC, but then a lot of these restrictions and travel bans and things like that, they come from other parts of the same government who are not familiar with, for instance, the Maritime Labour Convention and the obligations the country are under, which I think in many situations causes these problems. So yeah, thank you.
I see some questions already coming in, and just to remind everybody, you can either raise your hand or put it in the chat box. Guy, would you like to share your thoughts before we go into the Q&A session?
I'll be very brief because I think a lot of it's already been said, but I agree. We've got the Maritime Labour Convention it's the only international convention which regulates the welfare and of its workforce. We should be very proud of that as an industry. But what we saw was governments basically forgetting their international obligations. And that was, and if you ever get time to read the resolution from the Committee of Experts of the International Labour Organization, which was issued in December, is very damning on governments. They collectively fail to live up to their responsibilities. And it seems to me that international conventions are there for when things are going wrong. Yet what happened here was people just forgot about them when it was convenient to do so. And that's something which I find greatly disturbing actually going forward. You know, it's something that we have to sort of shout loudly about, I think, is that they're there for a reason. And but it does seem, because perhaps, as Lena was saying, other parts of government were focused on their own citizens maybe, and that's understandable, but suddenly the seafarers were just forgotten. And so we need to sort of highlight that, I believe, going forward. But we don't need any new legislation, in my opinion. We just need the existing stuff to be properly implemented and recognised.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you on that. And Catherine?
Thank you. I think I agree with everything that's been said. It's a really interesting conversation. I think the challenge with the MLC is really well known, that it perhaps just, when push comes to crunch, it just hasn't had enough teeth to ensure that people comply to what they've signed up to. So I think one of the areas that Seafarers UK and some of my colleagues across the charity sector have been pushing for, and at the same time I've been working on it with ISWAN. The Australian Maritime Safety Authority have also been looking at whether the MLC needs to be amended to make the reporting of suicide or death at sea compulsory or mandatory, because at the moment it's really difficult to get a clear picture of how many suicides there are at sea. And the reason it's important, and the reason we'd like to know, is because it makes it more difficult to develop solutions that could help mitigate suicide and make life at sea better. So we'd really like a clearer picture of that. But I recognise that if the MLC isn't a powerful enough tool to compel people to do that, then maybe we're not going to get to that solution.
Yes, exactly. Thank you very much, Catherine, for that. And because we kind of are running out of time, I would like just some concluding remarks and try to put the last pointers that I had together before we take questions from the audience. So we've discussed initiatives and the challenges and the current situation and going forward, and it's very important to also be thinking of strategies in respect to crew welfare when it does come to the future. And we are seeing great initiatives at the moment, like the Neptune Declaration and all the ones that your associations mentioned and support. But maybe if we could have a comment from each of you on what is that one thing you would like to see being implemented in the immediate future, if there's one that you can pick, of course. And how do we feel can we support this crew welfare strategies going forward? I mean, would things like automation help? Any other thoughts on that would be great. Debbie, could we start with you?
Yeah, thanks. I think things like the Neptune Declaration are obviously great, and it was really good to see that, and the summit that the UK government held were really good. But we are getting to the point now where seafarers have heard a lot of words and they still don't see any action. You know, the crew change crisis has been going on itself for a year. We're looking at seafarers who, and I don't think people outside of maritime really understand what it means to say their contracts have been extended, because to most people that just means you just carry on working and that's good. They don't kind of understand that we meet every single day without a day off for over 365 days. And I think we need to find a way of getting that message across of what it actually means to say to have their contracts extended, and stop kind of looking at each other and hoping someone else is going to solve it, and start thinking about what we all individually or as organisations can do, rather than pointing the finger at government or particular companies or ship registers. What can we all individually do to make it happen? And start looking at what the common themes are of countries that aren't doing it. You know, it's not just when we talk about designating seafarers as key workers, it's not just a name, it's not just a word, it's what it actually means to those seafarers to be designated as key workers, and what it means to being able to get home, and why that's really important. I think automation is interesting. I think automation on shore has certainly changed a lot over the last year. I'm not sure that it's really been realised at sea, and automation could work really well for seafarers, or it could work really badly, depending on what the driving force is. If the driver behind automation is reducing costs, if the driver is to make or just to do it to see if we can, then it's not going to help seafarers. If the driver is to make being on board a ship less isolating, more connected, we talk a lot in Nautilus about it's easier to contact the International Space Station than it is to contact seafarers at sea. That shouldn't be the case. We should be able to talk to our seafarers every day. And certainly for young people, that's what they expect. They have 24-hour lives online now. We need to be delivering that. When we compound it with all the other issues from COVID that we've seen going to sea, if we want young people to want to go to sea, we need to make it a place they want to go to. And so that's probably my summing up is we need to have a think about what we're asking of people when we ask them to go to sea now and be these key workers.
Definitely, especially now more than ever. Guy?
I think it's mostly all been said now. I think Debbie did a really good job of that. I think the connectivity is really quite a good one to maybe focus on, especially with there's more and more satellite capacity coming online, so there's no reason why it can't get better actually. There's Iridium, there's Inmarsat, they're launching new satellites with bigger bandwidth, and I think this idea that people can just get super fast broadband on board the ship is something that we should maybe look at. And I know some ship owners do an incredible job at that, but I think there's still a long way to go looking to the future. So yeah, I think it's been a really interesting discussion, and I'm looking at the time, I'll let other people come in as well, but really, really good discussion. Thanks, Gina.
Thank you, Guy. Lena?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, a lot of things have been said already. I think one thing, if we can only do one thing that be implemented soon, I think, again, it has been said already, but it's very important, and that is ensuring vaccination of seafarers, yesterday, preferably. So that is very, very, very important. I also want to highlight, in terms of what you mentioned, for instance, around automation, that it's not necessarily, of course, it can present opportunities too. It's not necessarily only a threat. It can easily be seen like that. And for women seafarers in particular, it can present opportunities. The jobs that were maybe have previously been not, physically maybe not that easy to do for a lot of women are now more available to them. However, we now need to focus a lot on ensuring that seafarers have the necessary education available to them, of course. And that has to be women as well, not only men, of course. And then we have to then ensure that the proper cadet and trainee berths are there and available for them, and that the job opportunities also are there for them when they're done with that. It's not like 2 months ago, I spoke to a woman who had, graduated at the top of her class from a maritime university, and she was trying to get a job in her home country. And she was told everywhere that no, they didn't want to hire her because she was a woman, and that's just not okay in 2021. So that we also have to keep our focus on that. I think the survey that at WISTA and IMO that you are doing together is a great effort in that, and of course we'll continue to support that and help with the distribution of the survey or whatever else we can do in order to support that. That's a great effort. So yeah, very briefly, I think that's. But yeah, just like Debbie said, we need a lot of action and not so many more words. I think very important. Thanks.
Actually, thanks for mentioning the survey. It's important to be highlighting it at this. It's the first one, and we need to be stressing it. I just want to say that unfortunately, Catherine had to leave. She does say, of course, keep your eyes peeled for exciting news from Seafarers UK, released 15th of March. And Guy, also, you need to go. I know, unfortunately. We do have to wrap it up actually, but Tim, I would appreciate your comments on this, and then maybe we take the audience questions and wrap it up there.
Thank you very much, Gina. I think in addition to what the others have already said, what I'd like to see is more effective cooperation between all the links in the chain that I described earlier. At different times, it has appeared that certain states viewed visiting ships and the seafarers on them primarily as a source of COVID infection, instead of seeing them for what they are, which is the source of the essential fuel, food, medicines, and medical equipment that they bring. If we get a proper appreciation of that, which hopefully we certainly should have, there's no excuse for it, then we might get this enhanced cooperation instead of different interests only focusing on themselves, such as the no crew change clauses that we've seen in charter parties, that are really, that's really quite an egregious example of this lack of cooperation. Automation, I believe, it has to assist in crew welfare going forward by making work on board less fatiguing and safer. Otherwise, how does one make a case for automation of ships? We're talking about something that's vastly expensive, when the shipping industry is still suffering from having renewed so much of its tonnage during the first decade of the current century, when finance was easily available, far more easily than it is now. And when you have ships that already operate 24/7, what is the practical benefit? So if it's to improve life at sea, to improve ship safety, improve seafarer safety, improve seafarer health and welfare, I'm all for it. But without that, it would be very difficult to persuade me that it was worthwhile. May I just, in closing, express my huge appreciation to all the seafarers in the world. I don't think it's sufficiently apparent what an incredible job they have done to ensure that our supermarkets have been supplied and our hospitals have had medicines. In the most horrendous circumstances, they have kept the supply chains moving, and they all deserve our deepest gratitude.
Definitely. Debbie, did you raise your hand? Was there something you wanted to ask before? Or
no, I was just clapping. I found my clapping emoji. I was agreeing very much with Tim that we need to find proper ways of showing our appreciation to seafarers.
Okay, indeed. So yeah, we need to wrap up somewhere here, but if there's any questions for the audience that you would like to put forward, feel free to unmute your mic or just quickly jot it down in the chat box. There was something from Vanessa, and she's expressing a concern here on the physical trainings. She said that most training centers for seafarers are closed due to the restrictions, obviously. And while there's a lot going on online, she was wondering what could be happening in this respect. I don't know if anybody wanted to comment on that before we close.
Can do if you wish, Gina.
Yeah, of course.
I think it's, on the one hand, it's a problem. On the other hand, it's an opportunity. At the moment, training schemes for seafarers and certification depends a lot on obtaining sea service and sort of academic face-to-face tuition in colleges and college time in workshops. Out of necessity, a lot of suggestions that have been made in the past about moving it online that have always been resisted. They became the only option, and in many cases they've proven their value. And I think there are lessons that we can learn with the a further comprehensive review of the STCW convention starting imminently, to see, well, what are the changes that one can make to modernize the way that seafarer training is delivered. So it's yeah, it's an interesting discussion. It's one that's taking place in several fora at the moment. If for example, it helps to alleviate the problems with finding training berths for seafarers, then that opportunity really ought to be taken, in my view.
Thank you. Thanks, Tim, for addressing that. And Debbie, are you clapping again, or is that a common question?
Oh, that's a raised hand. How can you not tell the difference between a clapping and a raised hand?
It appears as a raised hand. I don't know what's going on today.
I mainly wanted to agree with Tim that it's very difficult. I think there's two concerns here. There's concerns for cadets who are currently on training to make sure that they get their training that they need. We've seen cadets who are being dropped by their sponsoring companies because they've run out of time and didn't get to finish their courses. And there was lots of things done early on to make sure that funding got extended, so they didn't need to do that. And it's just another chance of unscrupulous companies doing what they can to remove costs off their books, I think. So I think there's that. We need to make sure that the cadets that are there are getting the training they need, be it online or in person. But I do think there's an opportunity now. We've been talking about the need to reinvigorate maritime training in the UK for a long time now, and I think this might be the push that we need to actually make those changes and see. Our seafarers are away when they're training for large periods of time on their sea phases. So if they have better connectivity on board, they can start tying their training in on those ways. And there's lots of things. Once you open up online training, it becomes much more viable for people. So I think we need to look at modernising the maritime training. And I know it's something that the Maritime Skills Commission are looking at with Maritime UK on how to do that in the future. So I think what we need to do is make sure that the cadets that are currently on their courses are looked after, and then have a think about what needs to happen for the future.
Thank you. Thanks, Debbie. So I think with that, I don't see any other questions, and we've already run almost 10 minutes over time. So thank you very much to this incredible panel and for accepting to be here today so willingly. Guy and Catherine, of course, are no longer with us, but thank you, Debbie, Lena, and Tim. I don't know if there's anything you would like to add, and I would like to just briefly say that on behalf of WISTA UK, we will also be having our next event on the 23rd of March at 1:30, which will be Brexit and the new trade agreement and implications on UK ports and trade. And we will be also supporting on the 8th of March, Women's International Day, the World Maritime University event on women leadership. And with that, I think, Sue, if you would, if I would like to do the closing remarks. And thanks to everybody for being here today.
So can I extend my thanks to you, Gina, for an excellent session. Thank you very much indeed. Just a couple of things I want to mention. We've already mentioned the survey, and I do encourage everybody to make sure they get it out to as many people as possible for us. It's open till June, so please do push it around. I also want to say WISTA UK and a number of other WISTAs around the globe are offering free membership to any seafarers. So if there is anybody you know who would like to become a part of the WISTA family and benefit from the network and also have a support mechanism around them, please do get them to sign up for free with different WISTAs, because it's actually, they're at sea, they can join any WISTA they fancy. So take up one of the countries that are offering the free membership and join. So do promote that throughout your organisations. That facility is there for a number of people. The other thing I think is it's a compass on all of us to really raise our voices, particularly on the vaccine issue. I'm not hearing as much about that as I think we should be saying, and I think it's really vital. So we all have an obligation, I think, to do that. With that, Gina's told you our next events. They're all on our website. They are open to anybody, so please join us. The recording of this will be on our website probably in about a week's time. So again, if you think there's any colleagues or people that you should actually benefit from listening to this, then send them to the website. They'll be able to hear it all again. So again, thank you all very much. Can I say thank you on behalf of WISTA. Stay safe, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Gina. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.